Matt Powell is one of the more vile human beings on the face of the earth, and he needs to be either exposed or shut down.
You ain't just whistling Dixie!
Welcome back, everyone, to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. Here at Bridge the Divide, I really try to approach the positions of various theists with as much intellectual honesty and social understanding as I can, while openly attacking and insulting young earth creationists, or anti-vaxxers, or any other antisocial, anti-science ideologue can be very entertaining. And let's face facts, next to Flat Earth, they're some of the easiest layups as far as content goes. The ultimate objective here is to lay the groundwork for future discourse and provide opportunities for research and learning, all while picking up a few laughs along the way. And occasionally, the topics that I address can be emotionally charged and societally divisive. So, with our shared humanity in mind, and to provide that aforementioned groundwork for social improvement, I find that a commensurate amount of decorum, sensitivity, and respect is warranted. So with that said, let's dive into the subjects of today's video: Matt Powell and Adolf Hitler. As a person with a hard-won reputation for intellectual dishonesty, willful ignorance, and violent hate speech, Matt has easily established himself as one of the more cringeworthy representatives of fundamentalist Christianity. And back when he was the submissive in his relationship with fellow conman Kent Hovind, Matt was afforded even more power and influence over the members of Kent's group, which made his ignorant rhetoric even more dangerous. And that reputation is nowhere better demonstrated than in his latest video titled "Some Will Hate Me for This Video," in which he goes hard in the paint trying to equate atheists and atheism with the aforementioned genocidal dictator.
I'll myself, I'll to me.
So prep your facepalm protection, take your beta blockers, and let's dive in.
Many people today are of the opinion that Adolf Hitler was a Bible-believing Christian.
Only those individuals who possess a rudimentary understanding of this abomination of a man, or those who wish to manipulate their audience by using the emotional gravity of his particularly heinous actions to misrepresent the entirety of his warped ideology. And to put it mildly, this is where things get profoundly difficult. The ultimate atrocities committed by Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich have cemented them as absolute villains in humanity's history.
Hans, are we the baddies?
Atrocities that place the dictator near the top of a list that includes Mao Zedong, Genghis Khan, Joseph Stalin, and Leopold II. And while the Reich targeted anyone they deemed undesirable, the fact that they made such a gruesome spectacle of targeting the Jews, the fact that so many lives were lost under the regime and in the ensuing war to defeat them, the fact that World War II ended less than 80 years ago, and like some putrescent infection upon our species, their influence is still felt in today's society, all make Hitler and his ideologies extraordinarily difficult to analyze past the emotional aspect. Because if not approached and handled appropriately, it can easily come off as reductive, revisionist, or at worst sympathetic. And that very fact is precisely what Matt is banking on to maintain the emotional manipulation of his audience. Matt knows that anyone who hazards an attempt to demarcate his lies from the known truth runs the very real risk of making themselves look absolutely terrible.
I do have some trepidation about the optics.
Well, you should. These are sensitive times. Perception is everything.
And because of this, there likely won't be many responses to this particular video of his, and thus his lies are allowed more latitude to propagate amongst the believers that follow him. However, as you know me, I am always up for a challenge, so I will address this video head on. Mostly because his disgusting claims minimize the suffering of the victims, the suffering of their families, and the heroic yet horrific sacrifices that were made to stop the madman, but also because I know that not addressing it is exactly what Matt Powell is counting on. So before we move on, to provide a response to Matt's initial statement, no, Hitler was not a Bible-believing Christian. And anyone that ever claimed that he was has virtually no understanding of the man, what he believed in, or why it led to the atrocities that it did.
And the reason that some people think that is because Hitler did masquerade himself as a Christian, and he would go to different churches and try and identify with people who identified with Christianity.
So this is a blatant misrepresentation of well-understood history. And because the only real positive that Hitler accomplished was killing Hitler, we have to go to his biographers, the records and diaries kept by his confidants and members of his inner circle, and the man's own words in order to try and understand his beliefs. While Hitler had been raised Catholic, and often referred to himself both publicly and politically as a German Christian, it was widely known that the dictator held a powerful distaste for Christianity itself. Though he was impressed by its organizational powers, Hitler did reject Christianity on what he considered rational and moral grounds. But for all of his personal rejection of Christianity, Hitler was not an atheist, and he was just as harshly critical of atheism as he was of what he saw as the decadence of Christianity. It could be understood that in Hitler's mind, atheism and Christianity constituted two ends of a theological spectrum, with atheism on one side reducing humanity to base animals, and Christianity on the other reducing humanity to mindless slaves. However, as a burgeoning autocrat, Hitler also recognized the incredible utility of religion, and he constantly sought a middle ground between science and religion that he could bring Germany to. At his core, Hitler was a monist who was deeply influenced by the works of Ernst Haeckel and Wilhelm Bolsch, as well as a nationalistic love of the ancestral pagan heroic legends and lore of Germany. Hitler's personal conception of the Christian God was that of divine providence, or God's intervention in the universe and upholding of the natural order. And it must also be pointed out that many members of his inner circle noted that he identified strongly with the character of Jesus, viewing Christ as an Aryan opponent of the Jews, which served to fuel his party's rhetoric. However, there existed two major problems here. The first is that Hitler's ideologies were as salad bar as the Protestant Christianity that his party promoted. He had a major tendency to cherry pick from the works of the greatest minds in theology, science, and philosophy in order to suit his agendas. And it's extremely difficult to pinpoint exactly when his megalomania and his hubris began to inform his beliefs and actions. So while the dictator certainly wanted a specific version of himself seen by the people for political reasons, he was at minimum a believing theist who held increasingly to the belief that he was God's instrument on earth, or what we atheists would refer to as a megalomaniacal and delusional cult leader who brutalized his way to global power.
And so the mainstream media at the time took this and ran with it, and made it appear as if Adolf Hitler was in fact a believer in Jesus Christ.
This is yet another misrepresentation of history. And I also have to point out Matt's anachronistic use of the term mainstream media when referring to the government of World War II Germany. It's nothing more than an emotional manipulation, a dog whistle term for today's far right regarding their growing distrust over today's media by drawing a false equivalence between what we call the Big Five and Hitler's propaganda machine. This picture that Matt showed earlier was taken in 1932 by Heinrich Hoffman, the dictator's personal photographer, and it was published that same year in Hoffman's picture book entitled Hitler as No One Knows Him. The image shows Adolf leaving the Christus-Ungarischen Kirche, an evangelical church in Wilhelmshaven. However, in a 1938 edition of the same book, the cross in the original image was edited out. Now, it's widely understood that in between 1932 and 1938, Hitler's views on many things changed, but none more so than his views concerning the relationship between the church and the state. So we can really only surmise that the photo, of which the original was widely distributed, was altered after the fact to avoid a potential controversy, given a possible change in his political positions between the publication dates. And despite his personal loathing for Christianity in and of itself, one of Hitler's major goals was to utilize the Reich to usher in a new age of non-denominational positive Protestantism. So Matt's assertion that the Reich's propaganda machine was attempting to sell Hitler as a believer to the people doesn't hold up to the evidence supplied by members of his own entourage and the dictator's own agenda for the future of Germany.
But after Adolf Hitler died, his journal was discovered. And all of the things that he actually really believed in his heart were also made known to mankind.
So this is where Matt is absolutely banking on the ignorance of his listeners. There was never a secret diary found after Hitler committed suicide in 1945. What Matt is referencing here was actually a hoax perpetrated by Konrad Kujau, a lifelong con artist and forger who sold a series of 60 volumes of forged journals that he claimed were written by Adolf Hitler. History tells us that as Soviet troops were on the verge of taking Berlin, 10 airplanes under the command of General Hans Bohr left Gatow Airfield as a part of Operation Seraglio, Hitler's evacuation plan. The last plane to leave the airfield carried 10 heavy chests with it that were under the supervision of Hitler's personal valet, Wilhelm Arndt. That plane supposedly crashed in the Heidenholz forest near what used to be the border between Germany and Czechoslovakia. And because the contents of the chest remain unknown and were never recovered, this created a ripe opportunity for forgery. It was an impressive con that netted Kujau a tidy sum from the multiple publications that he managed to fool. But historians eventually got their hands on the journals, and after rigorous forensic analysis, the ruse quickly fell apart. The only things Hitler ever directly wrote himself were his manifesto Mein Kampf in 1925, the posthumously published sequel Zweitsbuch in 1935, his political testament, and his private will and testament, which were both published in 1945. Other items he contributed to were the transcripts from his trial in Munich in 1924, and various transcripts of his speeches, monologues, interviews he gave, dictated notes and letters, and his war directives. So anything Matt asserts here about secret diaries that were found after Hitler's death and their contents is pure fabrication.
Many people had then come to realize that Adolf Hitler was not in any way Christian whatsoever, that he was in fact an atheist.
Another bald-faced lie that is easily exposed by the preponderance of evidence. While it may be difficult to quantify exactly what Hitler was in terms of what he believed in his own words, he despised atheism as much as he despised Christianity.
In Hitler's journal, he said this: "The heaviest blow that ever struck humanity was the coming of Christianity. Our epoch will certainly see the end of the disease of Christianity."
I honestly have to wonder if Matt ever gets tired of just lying his ass off. I mean, it takes far less energy and less memory to just tell the truth. This quote that Matt is citing did not come from any personal diary. It comes directly from a book called Hitler's Table Talk, which was a collection of his monologues transcribed from 1941 to 1944, published in the original German in 1951 by Henry Picker, and confirmed as authentic by Germany Minister of Armaments Albert Speer in his Spandau diaries. These cherry-picked quotes that Matt is using only affirm what we already knew, that Hitler really hated Christianity, while the whole atheist angle is completely fabricated by Matt himself. And as a kind of historical side note, it should be mentioned that very few people had positive opinions of Hitler's monologues. According to Albert Speer and Magda Goebbels, who were in regular attendance at Hitler's private dinners, the dictator was often referred to as a Besserwisser, or know-it-all, and that his rambling, hours-long, uninterruptible monologues were so tedious and boring, so cluttered with misinformation and unimportant details, that Hitler was forced to surround himself with flunkies because first-rate people would never have been able to stomach them.
So Hitler thought that Christianity was a disease, and his goal during his reign as the Führer was to, in fact, rid Christianity from the land.
Right, but Hitler's hatred of Christianity does not logically entail that he was an atheist. So asserting that Hitler was an atheist is just a non sequitur.
He even went on to say that the best thing is to let Christianity die a natural death. A slow death has something comforting about it.
Matt can't even get his citations correct. This quote did come from Hitler's Table Talk from a monologue he gave October 14th in 1941, but it was actually printed on page 59. It's also kind of weird that Matt is choosing to cite this book when it also contains the quote, "I shall never come personally to terms with the Christian lie. In acting as I do, I'm very far from the wish to scandalize, but I rebel when I see the very idea of providence flouted in this fashion." And this quote, "Christianity teaches transubstantiation, which is the maddest thing ever concocted by a human mind in its delusions, a mockery of all that is godly." both of which literally demonstrate that one of the reasons Hitler hated Christianity so much was because he felt it was a mockery of God. I would very much like to see Matt try and explain the logic behind an atheist openly hating and attacking an institution solely for making a mockery of a God that they don't even believe in to begin with.
Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty crazy to me. I mean, who wants to die a slow death, right? That's pretty delusional.
From his national rallies to his private dinner parties, Hitler had a well-known and particularly disliked habit of trying to sound as grandiose as possible when speaking. That Matt doesn't like Hitler's particular vocabulary choices when spreading his hyperbolic rhetoric is irrelevant to the topic at hand. It's literally just another emotional manipulation on Matt's part.
He said the dogma of Christianity gets worn away by the advances of science. Religion will have to make more and more concessions. Gradually, the myths crumble.
This quote is actually a continuation of the previous quote that Matt cited from the 1941 monologue that was printed on pages 58, 59, and 60.
So Adolf Hitler did all of these things because of his Antichrist views.
Yeah, we all see what Matt did there, but it is interesting that he chose to refer to Hitler as an Antichrist, because it's a callback to the works of Nostradamus, who famously prophesied that there would be 3 Antichrists, of which Hitler is interpreted as being the second, the first being Napoleon. So it's kind of odd hearing an extreme fundamentalist Protestant subtly reference the works of a 14th century French prognosticator who was also a staunch Catholic.
Because he believed that Jesus was a myth and that evolution and Darwinism was true.
Another flat-out lie. As explained in a critical examination of Hitler's worldview, the dictator not only held the position that Jesus was a shining example for every National Socialist, but he also believed that he was divine and an ally against the Jews who persecuted him. And the notion that Hitler's ideology was directly influenced by Darwin's initial ideas on evolution is also pure fabrication. This particular notion was born from Richard Weikart, a professor of history at California State University Stanislaus, who also happens to be an advocate for intelligent design and a senior fellow for the Discovery Institute. Weikart's primary work focuses on claims about the impact of evolution on social thought, morality, and ethics. He holds to the belief that modern thought has debased humanity, and he criticizes Darwinism as devaluing human life and promoting ideologies of racism and destruction. It is, of course, a false equivalency of the evidence-backed concept of Darwinism and the pseudoscience-backed concept of social Darwinism. And it is well understood that it wasn't Darwin that influenced Hitler's ideology, it was the corrupting influence of German biologist Ernst Haeckel and his disciple Wilhelm Bolsch. Haeckel and Bolsch both advocated for evolution, but where Darwin saw only slow change over time, they saw the potential for progress, advancement, and power. Their personal ambition coupled with their anti-Semitism led to a complete and total corruption of what Darwin both wrote and stood for. It is widely understood that any mention of Darwin or his work by Hitler or his regime was purely window dressing. Given their ultimate goals, the Reich desperately wanted to look as scientifically sophisticated as possible to the rest of the world, and the corruption of Darwin's conclusions gave the anti-Semitism that was common at the time a scientific character that helped to propel it forward. But even if Hitler had proclaimed to the skies that the entire inspiration for all of his actions was derived from the conclusions of Darwin, this wouldn't make the theory of evolution any less true. So claiming that the theory of evolution or Darwin himself had anything to do with the rise of Adolf Hitler, the Third Reich, or the Holocaust is just revisionist history perpetrated by those who understand that evolution irreparably damages their position.
Even Erich Fromm had said this. He said if Hitler believed in anything at all, then it was in the laws of evolution, which justified and sanctified his actions, and especially his cruelties.
So the quote Matt is citing here is from A.E. Wilder Smith's 1981 book, The Natural Sciences Know Nothing of Evolution. For those unfamiliar with him, Wilder Smith was an organic chemist and a young earth creationist, which just goes to show that with enough intellectual dishonesty, you can marry even the most antagonistic of positions. But in that quote, Wilder Smith himself was apparently quoting German psychoanalyst, philosopher, and Marxist Erich Fromm. But oddly enough, while I did find this same quote that's attributed to Erich Fromm being used by a number of other theists in their arguments, especially anti-science evangelist John MacArthur, none of them ever cite specifically in what publication Fromm wrote it, and I have thus far been unable to find it in any of his bibliography. So given that the source that Matt is citing in this video was as intellectually dishonest as Matt himself is, I think we'll be safe taking this with a grain of salt until further evidence is presented.
So that was why Hitler did what he did, was because he believed in Darwinian evolution.
Nope, he accepted and espoused Haeckel's and Bolsh's corruption of Darwin's ideas. But just as a hammer's utility in committing a murder doesn't invalidate the hammer's use in carpentry, the use of science for corrupt endeavors does not entail that the science itself is corrupt.
You have more chance of reanimating this scalpel than you have of mending a broken nervous system.
But what about your grandfather's work, sir?
My grandfather's work was doo-doo!
He believed in the false religion of evolution by natural selection.
There's that creationist nonsense we've all come to expect. Espousing that evolution is a religion is about as profoundly ignorant as you can get.
I mean, he would even strap people down on tables and inject blue dye into their eyes to try to get them to evolve faster, right? Because he thought that the Norwegians were the most superior.
So what Matt is citing here did not actually come from Hitler himself, but is actually the work of infamous Schutzstaffel doctor Josef Mengele, who notoriously operated with complete autonomy and with zero oversight. Desperately seeking academic promotion, Mengele engaged in numerous unethical human experiments with a near unparalleled disregard for human life. And while sifting through that library of human misery and absolute horror, I did find that ophthalmic research was something that Mengele was actively involved in, fully believing that he could demonstrate hereditary differences in race via iris structures and possibly cure heterochromia. And while there are records of Mengele injecting adrenaline into the eyes of children in an attempt to change their eye color, I was unable to find a record of him doing what Matt is asserting he did. Now, does this mean that Matt got the anecdote wrong, or that he misrepresented it in order to support his false narrative? Does this mean that Mengele himself never thought up this particularly horrific crime while he was displaying human eyes in his laboratory like some macabre butterfly collection straight out of the Stephen King nightmare? Honestly, who knows? But what we do know is that this is just another emotional manipulation on Matt's part. Because we also know that the shocking inhumanity and cruelty of Josef Mengele had absolutely nothing to do with Hitler's personal beliefs and absolutely nothing to do with atheism. And in my personal opinion, for Matt to so wantonly misrepresent these historical horrors for his own personal gain demonstrates an inhuman level of disrespect to the memories of those countless victims and the endless suffering of their families.
And keep in mind that atheists will do everything they can to stop this video.
Well, that would be pretty ridiculous because demanding a shutdown of Matt's video would be a violation of free speech. He is allowed to spout his ignorantly hateful and repugnant rhetoric so long as it fits within the limitations of the First Amendment. The only one with any legal right to stop Matt's video would be YouTube itself, being a private platform that determines the rules for any content that it hosts. Personally, as an atheist, I want Matt to keep making these asinine videos. 1, they're easy to debunk, and therefore they're easy content. And 2, because the more we debunk Matt Powell, the more we see his emotional instability beginning to increase. Thus, his rhetoric will get worse and worse and invariably drive more and more people away from him. It really is a win-win.
They'll do everything they can to debunk what I'm saying.
Nah, it wasn't all that hard to debunk, though. It really just took about a week's worth of research, a bit of heavy reading, and some carefully constructed responses.
But they're not debunking me. They would have to debunk fact.
Yeah, which is precisely what I did here. And while I did have to wade through some particularly nasty stuff, it wasn't that hard.
Because this is what Hitler wrote in his journal. He might have masqueraded as a Christian, but in the end, the truth was made known.
Yeah, debunk the whole journal thing, the whole atheism thing, and the whole masquerading thing. Everything Matt did here was pretty much a combination of emotional manipulation and blatant lies.
So don't allow people to deceive your kids, or yourself even, into thinking that Adolf Hitler was a Christian.
No one ever said that, Matt. That's your false claim.
Because Adolf Hitler was in fact an atheist.
Yeah, debunk that lie too. Now from this point in the video, Matt throws up another quote from that previously mentioned monologue from Hitler's Table Talk while still getting the page wrong. He then cherry picks a quote from anthropologist and proponent of scientific racism Sir Arthur Keith and then presents that quote completely out of context. Because the full quote from Keith goes on to explain Hitler's fundamental misunderstanding of what evolution was and the disastrous application of that misunderstanding. And then Matt plays two clips from one of his critics saying how much they hate him and how much they want him shut down, likely in an attempt to spur sympathy from the audience for his Christian persecution complex. And finally, he caps it all off with an anonymous-style warning of conspiratorial action on behalf of atheists. Now, I will admit that I was initially hesitant to address this particular video. And not just because my current search history has probably landed me on a couple of watch lists. Individuals like Matt Powell will often address topics that they personally hate by fallaciously couching them in topics that are often universally despised. And the reasoning behind this is because it often makes it harder for their critics to attack them, as they often run the risk of damaging their own reputations while attempting to demarcate the lies from the historical or scientific truth. And in not addressing these particular videos, Matt's abhorrent lies to his audience are allowed to propagate further, which is precisely why I chose to tackle this extremely sensitive topic and expose Matt's vile character. Because regardless of anything else, Matt Powell is banking on me not doing it. When the antisocial, genocidal extremists of the world are able to spread their hateful rhetoric with impunity because their critics are too concerned with how they may or may not look when tackling the subject, is when individuals like Matt Powell, Kent Hovind, or Greg Locke, or others are enabled to gain a destructive foothold in the lives of others. They are literally banking on people like myself being too self-concerned to call them out on their demonstrably dangerous bullshit. And I, for one, think it's time to show them that we are not. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, February is American Heart Month. A link on how you can support these efforts is down in the description. And if you love scary movies, be sure to check out me and my filmmaker friends over at the Week in Horror podcast, now in our 4th season. Everything you need to become a channel member here, get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear, support the podcast, or even pick up one of the new official Darth Dawkins Squeak toys is in the description below. Once again, thank you all so much for your continued support, and as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together, we can bridge the divide.